So, this is another house that I'm going to be in, another person I'm talking with this week. This is Joel. And so, I haven't seen you since March.
Which is weird.
Right.
We see plenty of each other otherwise.
We used to see each other multiple times a week, almost every day.
Agreed. Are we being real people right now, or has the documentation officially begun?
I mean, the camera's on.
It's on. Are we now alive for the purposes of other people, not just ourselves?
People are watching.
Wow.
Potentially.
Okay. All right.
So the only thing the only off limits thing is to dock or name people. So like if you wanted to refer to a mutual person, then you might describe them, but not describe where they live or their names or anything like that, right? That's really the only off limits thing.
Purely hypothetically, because this was not that was not part of my agenda, mostly because I don't have one. Today, presently.
Right.
But if I decided that I wanted to, did you say doc? Is that like doxing? Okay. If I decided that I did, or if our conversation reminds me of someone whom I have not yet let go of my loathing for, or chosen to hold on to my loathing for, could I refer to them with like an obviously fake name, but many, many times?
Sure.
It's
just that this is going to be public, and so you have to be responsible.
Yeah. That's an exciting prospect. Yeah, because then I get to call them a name in the interests of their best interests. That's doubly satisfying.
And so you can just pick the presidents that you hate the most, maybe.
Oh, I was thinking like maybe historical or folkloric figures, right? Yeah. I don't know which one of those Pinocchio is, perhaps both, but like, just go for it. And not on the nose thing. The nose thing is played out, but rather, now I'm going to have to think of someone whom I deem somehow
representative of
well, specifically annoyingly wooden. So wooden that it's been a problem for me at some point.
Interesting.
To reference, yeah.
Let's see.
Or stringy.
Did you ever watch Small Wonder when you were a kid?
Of course I watched Small Wonder.
So you can refer to this person as Vicky if you want to. Is that?
But I kind of always liked Vicky. Like maybe like in ways that we shouldn't make wholly public. Like
I see.
Yeah.
So you want to have maybe Bob Newhart?
I like Bob Newhart really well, actually.
Okay.
In fact, if you start saying bad things about Bob Newhart, I'm going to say, stop it!
And so this has to be...
Stop it!
So this has to be something that you do not like. That's completely sort of wooden.
Yeah.
Oh,
but that's okay.
Margaret Thatcher was very wooden.
Yeah.
She's pretty detestable.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Agreed on all counts, I guess.
So I guess you could
I'm probably being unfair, at least a little bit, to Margaret Thatcher in that case. I've not, really explored her.
Did you ever watch Iron Lady, that documentary?
Nah.
I heard it was really well received, but I don't watch it either.
I did that much reading on Margaret Thatcher.
Mm-hmm.
I have a particular amount of curiosity about history that has happened during my life, which is to say, sometimes in sharp, punctuated doses, I'll go all in, man. But in general, I like to read history for the same reason I like to read, fiction, just to explore worlds I've not otherwise had
I think
access
you're an avid reader, so what have you been reading the past 6 months? Anything in particular?
Do audiobooks count as reading?
Yes, of course.
I decided to take in. I'm still not comfortable calling it reading.
I didn't start my timer.
Oh,
sorry.
Okay, no problem.
So let me see how far in there. Let me just start right now.
No problem.
I always forget about that step. So let's just... how long do you think that was? Maybe 5 minutes?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. Okay, continue.
No problem. There have been a few things, but the kind of the majority case, I decided that I wanted to have taken in. I'm still not comfortable saying read, because it's listening, it's not reading. All of John le Carré. So
I'm not familiar. Is this
you're probably more familiar than you realize.
Okay.
Started writing in the 60s. Former legitimate intelligence officer in Britain, and became a novelist of mostly spy stories.
Okay.
Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is him.
So is this like Tom Clancy style?
Oh God,
okay.
no. I mean, okay, maybe if Clancy managed to achieve a couple of actually good books somewhere along the
But
line.
it's in the same sort of genre?
Sure, it is still genre, but it is authentically literature.
Okay.
Whereas, I think...
But we're not talking about, like, Gravity Rainbow. Gravity, what is that one?
Yeah, Pension...
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd say that Tinker Tailor is as much literature as anything else I've read from the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
But, I didn't continue in academia for lots of reasons, in part, and among those, people always certain that I was wrong about such estimations. So, yeah. So screw all those Pinocchios. Mm-hmm. I say Le Carré is, all kidding aside, master storyteller,
Okay.
and a master of our language. He's written a lot of books. Not all of them maybe are high art, but that's true of everybody, right?
Mm-hmm. So, what do you think has been your sort of? Are there any kind of takeaways from this? Any sort of deep things that you've learned in the past maybe 6 months? It's been about 6 months now, right?
Yeah. I get evasive when asked to identify anything with a definitive value, like deep, right? I feel like a lot of that is kind of transient, especially relative to time.
Right.
But the stuff that's hit me hardest, and keeps me thinking, so I guess in that sense is most interesting to me.
Yeah.
I was not at all unaware that our social fabric was fragile. And by social fabric, I mean the whole shtick, right? Our government.
Oh, the protests and all those things. Yeah, all
not
those.
even that, just how we work together.
Ah, okay.
Also protests, also
yes.
the functioning of our government,
right.
Also how people think about each other and relate to each other and, of course, themselves.
Yeah.
It was clear that it was full of fragility.
Mm-hmm.
The degree of that fragility was greater than I realized. So many of the basic buttresses evaporated, not only more quickly. It's not just a question of time, but also with less push than I would have expected. I guess the easier or kind of ham-handed way to express this was with incredibly little violence, and of course at some level, hundreds of thousands of people dying is actually quite a lot of violence. But violence executed by things we cannot see, we're not usually calling violence, right? But also actually that's unfair. That was the ham-handed thing, that qualifier, actually, because we both know what I mean. Without great social unrest, or I should say before great social unrest, without any armed revolutionary things, or I don't know. I guess I mean to say violence as the mechanism of the change, or as the cause rather than the effect. Mm-hmm. Lots of stuff changed really quickly. And even though my understanding of our world included the capacity for that, I was surprised.
There's a Vladimir Lenin quote. I'll probably botch it because it's Russian, but it was sometimes a week happens in a decade, and other times a decade happens in a week.
Sure, yeah.
Something like that, yeah.
I perhaps we are in a time in which both are happening.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think that's probably the tough stuff. And of course that also means all the time both are happening, right?
Yeah.
We just are able to see it more clearly now because we have these catalyzing events that are also lenses through which we see all of our realities that are always operative. We just, for the most part, choose to respond to the current ones differently than we do our normal sets of stimuli.
I think that this is presuming that the future will be much like the past, let's say 6 months or a year from now, I think that this will be one of our most notable years collectively. When we're like 60 or 70 years old, I'm hoping that we think back and say, wow, remember that craziness that we had. This might be our 1968, if you will.
I hope not.
Really?
Yeah, because this... personally, I've put the time to decent use better than I managed to make use of most time.
Yeah.
That's only because I suck. And I think the world has done some admirable things with this time, and I think perhaps people have come to important and or valuable revelations, and who knows what kind of interesting work is getting done presently that we just haven't seen yet.
Right.
But I really hope that we both have the good fortune to live years that are much more mentionable than this one, for reasons that are much more enticing and attractive and, well, fun, because this ain't what I'm sticking around for, I hope for better,
There was this one sort of, he's actually a eugenicist from the 1800s who was trying to explain
So,
how...
by which you just mean he's just from the 1800s?
Well, no, he was specifically a eugenicist.
Yeah.
And he was trying to explain why people in the northern latitudes, approximately where he lived, were the greatest people ever, right? And
like they do.
what he basically said is, he said, people in the Mediterranean, right, the weather is so nice that they're just going to be picking fruit all day, right? And people...
So basically everything that the rest of the nation says about California now.
And people in the high north, right, it's so cold that they can't get anything done.
Sure.
But here, in merry old England, we happen to have a couple months of winter where we are all cooped up in our homes, and that's where we can write our novels and get our things done, and then we can enjoy ourselves, during the sunny days in between.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about that. Like, this is a point where we all have that opportunity of being cooped up in our homes for 6 months. And granted, a lot of us aren't going to use it well, but I'm sure that some people are writing great literature, or they're doing some great scientific studies, or whatever type of making great works of art or music or something like that. I think that there might be a time to shine a year or two after this. We might see some really great things that come out of this.
Absolutely. Whichever set of interesting, crafty, and/or genius folks crafted the Chinese characters for chaos and opportunity as the same thing had this idea a long, long time ago. Right? And every Westerner who's mentioned that in an academic work since, right? people have recognized that dynamic. I wonder how much of those great stories, the writing of Frankenstein over essentially a long, stormy weekend.
Right.
Awesome story. Pretty much true. Like, we have the manuscript from it. There was a lot of editing, or some editing. Okay, that part's debated. But I don't mean to dispute the facts of that weekend. What I mean to say is, I got a suspicion that Mary Shelley was pretty competent and capable, irrespective of storm. Did the storm and the time with friends and the atmosphere of the house they were in contribute? Yeah, probably, sure. But once we're really looking at opportunity cost, gosh, maybe there was a better book that could have been written on a sunny day in a house she was familiar with better friends. Because frankly, those people were like drunks and opportunists and cheaters and stuff.
There's Raoul Dahl, that did Charlie Chocolate Factory and Giant Peach. In his house, he had a garden in the back, and back there he had this sort of like Victorian stagecoach.
Okay.
That he used as his writing room.
Cool.
And it all looked very 19th century.
Yeah,
and it opened up to his garden.
If any of my friends had that, I'd make merciless fun of them for it, whilst also being jealous and admiring it. Yeah.
I mean, he wrote it as his writing room.
Yeah.
And he had a bunch of rules laid down when he was there about that you weren't allowed to go to the garden, you weren't allowed to disturb him in order for him to do his work.
Okay, so I call a little bit of bullshit at least on that, because if you've taken up a big footprint in the garden with a stagecoach, and you've got, I'm sure, other rules about the stagecoach, you're also going to deny everyone else access to the rest of the garden? Like, dude, you've claimed your spot, use your spot, let other people in the garden while you're stagecoaching.
Well, it's just its own place,
I mean, okay, sure, but still.
So
So you were saying there was more to that point.
It was more. It was more that they. Let me mute that.
Did you bring a droid?
An android? Well, that's where I'm doing my timing from. So.
You made it clever. I meant like an astromech, who I feel would be much better at this than me. Would drive much more interesting content for you than I will.
Pardon me?
Never mind. I was being sincere and self-deprecating, fearing that there's no way I'll manage to fill your time with stuff interesting enough for people to watch.
Right, yeah. Whenever you decide to insult yourself, I choose not to listen.
Aww, that's the sweetest thing at least you've ever said to me. So
only
there's
because there's a camera on.
Right. So there's not more to the Roald Dahl stage.
It was just an example of how people set a space for creativity, and they, to these like very sort of. Space is important, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And like, what you do with that space is really sort of determines what happens within it.
I don't know about determines. That seems more absolute than I'm comfortable signing on for.
Well,
certainly
influences. If
yeah,
you will,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, our dojo used to be a restaurant, right? Is that true?
I don't know.
Whatever it was before.
Well, I know what it was immediately before
Uh-huh.
it was our dojo. It was a plumbing supply house.
Well, that's an example.
Or a plumbing supply depot. It was stacked floor to ceiling
Uh-huh.
with boxes of plumbing supplies. Not much else.
So it's same space, completely different purpose, right?
I don't know. At one level, we still go there to try and clean out our shit. And to make things flow.
I just go down. I just go there to inflict pain on people.
I feel like that's the secret agenda of more plumbers than we are comfortable acknowledging to ourselves. I mean, just think of those Mario brothers constantly jumping on people's heads, mashing their own heads into.
I think we were talking about just the pursuit of martial art. I think that there's there's a sort of. We live in this civilized world, and the civilized part robs us of a lot of engagements, and some of them are I totally agree with. Like, I don't know, forcing a woman to have sex with you, right? That's something you shouldn't have in a civilized world, right? We call it rape, which is very wrong. But other types of things that we rob ourselves from are probably things that we should engage with. Maybe the physical connectedness that martial arts has. It's a kind of physicality that you see in the natural world a lot more. But outside of a dojo, that's seen as something that is only reserved for somebody that you're sexually involved with, or very intimate, or family, or something like that. It's not. There's no sort of other space for that. And I think that having one is healthy.
Completely agree. There are other outlets certainly for that.
Sports, for instance.
Yeah, but also things that maybe are actually more in strict alignment with the word sports per its definition than we normally use the term. Most of what we call sports are game and not sport, but people find excuses to interact physically.
Mm-hmm.
I think much more often than we realize the need to acknowledge to ourselves for the reasons that you're alluding to, for the purposes of social and civic, I don't know, propriety, which is
people that do
pretty
dancing,
improper.
for instance.
Or even just
there's a big system here.
I think it's perhaps an underappreciated aspect of going to dinner with people. Passing things across a table is absolutely physical interaction. And maybe more intimate than is totally wonderful to talk about, but often when you're handing somebody something across a table, it's so they can put it in their mouths.
Mm-hmm.
At what line is that not an intimate act, right? And so, of course, we're deprived of all of these things right now, or at least somewhat, or at least significantly, I don't know.
Right.
And all that's got impacts that I think folks are both very viscerally aware of, and at some levels rhetorically responding to, and then at others maybe not in touch with, because we haven't, and we probably won't be as much as we need to be until if we ever are authentically past it and can reflect on.
I mean, meals and conversations seem to be pretty intimately related in basically any historical place I've looked at. I mean, I'm not an anthropologist, but I've never really found one where they say, we have meals, but we never converse.
That'd be really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
To just meaningfully nibble cheese at each other, essentially. We should do that. The last 15 minutes of this show should. I have some cheese, man. I have some decent cheese, not good, but totally decent cheese, such that we could just both just eat it while looking at each other substantively. 10, 12 minutes, you guys are in for that? You're in
we
for
could do that.
I'm breaking the fourth wall even just at the thought of cheese. Like, that's how much it inspires me.
No, it's okay, because, if you're still watching this after 40 minutes, you deserve that.
You deserve cheese.
You deserve to just watch people, like some kind of bizarre 80s film.
Yeah.
So there was one topic that you wanted to get into, and so...
I don't know if I wanted to, but
Well.
we talked about topics, and it came to mind, only because I don't feel qualified to pick a topic. Competition. And I think it's in line with some of the items that have already come up.
Uh-huh.
Because I think one of the reasons it persists to the degree that it does, because it is another, I don't know if outlet is the right word, actually maybe inlet for intimacy.
It's a type of relationship, yeah.
Yeah. An excuse for intimacy, maybe even
Interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, and it is also both sport and game, right? And I find it abhorrent in most of its practical realizations, and yet not necessarily any bad at all in its isness, in the base reality of the thing, but incredibly pervasive in our experience for reasons that are not at all necessarily so. The inertia of competition in the fabric of our interactions with each other, it amazes me, because every once in a while it produces significantly rewarding results for folks. Quite often it produces more iteratively rewarding results for folks, but basically constantly it produces suffering for people. And we spend so much of the rest of our existences, including quite a lot of our existences that are riddled with competition of one kind or another, in attempts to avoid suffering. But then we undertake competition as the mechanism for that alleviation.
So when I was like 5 or 6 years old, and my parents, I did like 1 year of baseball, 1 year of soccer, whatever, and whenever our team won, I always looked at the other team, and I was like, I made them upset. It's just, and I just felt bad about it. I couldn't rile in the victory without knowing that there's people that, should be friends with over there that are, sad, that I made sad, kind of.
You made the mistake of being a good person, at least that much. That will doom you every time. At least more suffering.
It holds me back, yes.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, the teams I was on as a kid didn't have the problem of watching the other team lose too often. We were very, very good at losing, and only that, in all of the sports. Tiny school, yes. Small talent pool, yes. Poison talent pool because it had me in it. And that's a self-criticism that's accurate and pertinent, so you can't ignore it. I did also have that same feeling you did. A couple of times of winning, it felt exhilarating in a really awful way. I did not enjoy the exhilaration of winning after the first, 15 or 30 seconds. And that was also true with like board games with my family members. I have a question on that point. I want to detour briefly. Either my family were bad liars, or I have underestimated how up the jig is on this point. Do most kids know their family is letting them win? And if so, from what age?
My family didn't
Let you win?
No, it was no.
Okay.
I would often lose, and I thanked him for that. We'd be playing like some kind of puzzle game, and I'd be playing with my mother, and that she would. It was pretty even-handed. Like,
right?
She'd try.
I know I was handed defeat sometimes, but not at anything like a rate that would have been realistic relative to my general skill at life at the ages that I'm thinking of. And I remember being onto it and thereby both embracing it, like I wanted the victory, even at that cost of my, I don't know, integrity, or I guess at the integrity of the pursuit. I don't know that I had any integrity to speak of at ages 5 or 6 or 8 or whatever. So I clung to it, but I also deeply resented it. And when I got older,
you thought that it wasn't genuine?
Because I knew that it wasn't genuine.
He knows,
And because I didn't want I didn't want nor want to need any kind of pity, support, whatever.
Handicap.
Yeah, if I was going to win, I wanted to win on my own terms by my own effort, right?
But that's one other thing I wanted to talk about, is that there's something about competition. Something with competition that, like, there's a pecking order that it exposes. And I wouldn't deny that, let's say, Michael Jordan is better at basketball than I am, right?
Right.
There's certainly,
realistically, he's probably better at basketball than either of us will ever be at
correct,
anything.
of course.
Yeah.
But to say that Magic Jordan...
And I mean still.
Oh,
whatever old age he is now.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But these kinds of sort of pecking orders, I think that you can sort of qualitatively group people in large things, but then once you get to a certain sort of fineness or a quantifiable kind of level, I don't know if that's genuine anymore. Like, I don't know if you could say that, I don't know, Michael Jordan is significantly better than one of his peers on his team that's also in the NBA. I'd probably put them in the same class, if you will. I'm not familiar with a lot of basketball players. But what I'm trying to say is that one of the things about competition is that, like the Olympics, right, is that they'd say, well, here's the gold medalist, here's the silver, here's the bronze. The gold is better than the silver. Like, no, they're all like world class. They're all extremely good at what they do. And the fact that you have to then declare one is better than the other when they're just as good, or in any of these games, you'd have the two top teams playing against each other. One of them gets a slightly higher score than the other. You say, oh, well, this team is better. Well, no, I mean, that's the cheat that I don't like, because you put a number behind these groups of people that are the elite practitioners, whatever it is, and they're just as good.
I completely agree with you, and completely disagree with your entry into the idea.
Mm-hmm.
But we come to the same conclusion,
mm-hmm.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
The point of Michael Jordan is that he is the definition of exceptional, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Absolutely defines a class. Maybe there are others in it, but definitely
mm-hmm.
not most people on most teams, even at the NBA.
Well, sure.
Right? He is exceptional in that respect. But I think your point is somewhat different and more important than that. And that is, set aside Michael Jordan for a moment. We'll get
mm-hmm.
back to him.
Right.
And we're going to make Michael Jordan wait, because it's our world.
Mm-hmm.
Just this one time, Michael. It doesn't matter. None of it, right? Once acknowledged, once you're in the Olympics,
right?
Even if you're not one of the 3 on the stand, just having made it to the Olympics,
of course, yeah,
right? Even if you're, I never watched the movie, but apparently there was a Jamaican bobsled team, and
mm-hmm.
they made it to the Olympics. I don't care if they came in 20th out of 20 bobsledding teams. Who cares about bobsledding? And awesome work getting to be the 20th best bobsledding team.
Yeah, if you finish the marathon, that's the point.
I do not care at all about the 19 best bobsledding teams. Bravo to the Jamaican team
mm-hmm.
for being there,
mm-hmm.
right? Especially, what amazes me is how much esteem our culture gives to that winning portion of competition. When, especially in the sports world, which defines so much of it,
mm-hmm.
they know and acknowledge the mono no aware, the fleetingness of it, right? On all of the awards.
Mm-hmm.
You win the World Series that year.
Mm-hmm.
The World Series is 7 games because anything can happen in one game,
yes.
right? And even then, we know it's not really enough games to identify which team is truly better. At least a lot of the time, maybe all the time.
Well, yeah,
and then even if you did, we're talking about differences that are so small that there's no way that they matter in any objective way unless you're really into the trophy. And I've never seen a competition where the trophy itself, in any way, was worth the effort to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Not because of the rarity or scarcity of the materials, the dollar value that you could trade it in for, or any of those things. I can't think of a single competition where the work to get there, and sure, people win these things sometimes essentially by accident, fluke, or inertia, right? But folks who work to win a thing, and I mean everything from an Olympic trial to a regional
Academy Award.
Sure, especially that. Actually, it's an excellent example because it's so random. But also even just like a community flower, garden competition, right?
Mm-hmm.
The amount of work it takes to be even considered for recognition, compared to the paucity of the award and reward. Clearly, people are participating in these things for reasons other than the rewards ascribed to the victory. Those reasons, I think, are often beautiful. Maybe sometimes terrible. Almost certainly sometimes absolutely awful. But often also, beautiful and worth the doing. But it's at one level for me deeply frustrating to watch how organized, the participants, but also we as an audience, we should have an objective distance from these things. I expect Michael Jordan to care intensely about his quality as a basketball player, far more than we do.
Well, there's let's go after Lenin and go to Stalin, who had a quote on this when he was talking about the military, and he says something like, he would never get over how many men will go to their death for meaningless ribbons of cloth. You have to wear their lapels, right?
No, I do think that specific
I forget exactly how he
situation.
says it. But
I'm familiar though. I do think that's a little bit of conflation of causes and effects.
Right.
Because warfare, right?
Of course, of course.
Warfare, of course, includes competition, but it is also the thing apart.
I understand, but it's the same kind of sentiment.
And the opposite exceptional case for Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
I told Michael that he'd have to wait for a second. Now I want to bring him back in.
Yes, sir.
So he's so elite. And, people who care way more about basketball than me are easy to find. But, put Kobe and LeBron in the same territory.
Sure.
And let's not pick favorites so that people don't dox either of us, right? But you can call me Pinocchio if you want. That's fine. I can be wooden. They are authentically a head above. In the case of basketball players, literally.
Right.
And usually the way of getting there and or just the undeniable fact of being there does add an extra element, like a poetry on top of the competition. I remember watching basketball and again caring only a certain amount. Like I enjoyed playing it. I think I own one basketball t-shirt, right? And that was a hand-me-down that I don't remember how I acquired, right? So I didn't care, but I remember seeing Michael Jordan play and feeling the jaw drop. Literally, knowing what people meant now.
There are some very amazing moments of that where it's like it's choreographed almost.
Yep. And I don't mean to say that those truly elite level folks are the only ones capable of producing those moments.
Correct.
But boy, oh boy, do they seem to produce them at incredible rates. And that's worth the seeing, but I don't think it becomes even close to worth the competition that must exist in order for those.
That's an interesting sort of second way of looking at it. Because as you were talking, I was thinking about, going back to what I said beforehand, how there's basically this model, if you will, how there's maybe noise and variance. What I'm trying to say is that when you're trying to say a gymnast at the Olympics, right, who gets gold, silver, or bronze, and then you find out that somebody, I don't know, their foot slipped a little bit, and then they get the bronze. And if they didn't do that, then they would have gotten gold. It's an extremely minor thing, and it could have easily swapped. What I'm saying is that the variance and the variability at that level is enough that those rankings could swap.
Absolutely.
But the variance isn't so exorbitant that I would be mistaken for that.
Right.
And so it's an interesting sort of thing. I don't know where that is.
You know what's the referent for that?
Well,
you don't know where what is.
I think that the level of variance or variability is not the same in every type of pursuit. Writing, for instance, right? Is that we could disagree on whether something was well written. if I read like Finnegan's Wake, right?
I wonder how true that remains if we were able to somehow qualify and or equalize the standards for audienceship and presentation. So, professional sports, we started there. It's easy enough to talk about. There is this tier of access to being viewed as an athlete. And it's certainly an imperfect crucible, absolutely littered with the incidental, slippery floors and whatnot.
Yeah.
But no matter what your sport is, curling, right?
Sure.
If you're going to get on TV with it, you've got to be one of the best.
Absolutely, yeah. I hope so.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Writing, you mentioned, right? I don't know that the pursuit is any less truly objective in its skill and accomplishment than any sport we could name. Because you could admire a curler for lots of different reasons. Wow, look at how he ices. I think that's a different sport. But, you could admire their form or their efficacy or the conflation of the two, right? Intersection of the two, rather. And that's essentially what people are doing when they're comparing John le Carré and Tom Clancy, right? Absolutely, both le Carré and Clancy are efficacious. Absolutely, both achieved what they did because they could achieve a result that was catalyzing for people, but differently catalyzing, and toward different goals in different terms. But that's the same difference as exists between our two hypothetical curlers.
But yeah, some of them are a little bit more wild. Like the example I gave is James Joyce, right?
Okay.
A lot of people might find his work to be impenetrable gobbledygook. And they're like, this is just nonsense, right?
Yeah.
And then they could say, oh, this guy doesn't know how to write. Well, what is this?
Yeah.
Or modern art, right? Yeah, they'll look at Rothko, right? Who has like these two different shades of color. And it's like, this guy can't paint, right? While other people would say, oh, there's the finest painter in the world, right?
You're
there's
remaking my first point. Maybe
certain things that are wildly variant.
Yeah, you're remaking my first point.
Yeah.
Maybe better, or maybe much worse than I did. I don't know.
Sorry.
No, please don't be.
Okay.
I completely agree with you relative to that first adjective ascribed to Joyce. It would be totally fair for certain people reading James Joyce and deeming it impenetrable. Fair. Frankly, I think it was one of the things he was going for. I don't know how you can be James Joyce and not know that what you're putting down there is going to be inaccessible for a lot of people who ever encounter it. But he also knew he was doing other stuff. And that's why I say the stuff you said after that first word, that's where it gets into like the opinion of that thing. And that's why people argue over who was better, Kobe or LeBron, and whether either of them was better than Jordan, too. Because there's that level at which it's objectively true that this person is a master in their craft, and then the next piece is opinion. And the delivery, the means of delivery, the mechanism by which we, become audiences of these different pursuits is where I think they seem, again, existentially different on this measure of whether there is an authentically elite level. Because Tom Clancy is elite at what Tom Clancy does. James Joyce is elite at what James Joyce does. Le Carré is elite at what Le Carré does.
No,
but
can't you just say that about anybody, though?
No, I don't.
There's better versions of you, you're saying?
The way you worded that disproves your own argument, makes my point. If we are narrowing the sample set of participants, firstly down to me, which your diction did, and the pursuit set of being me, then no, right?
Right.
By definition.
Right.
But any of the things I am, I'm the best at being me, even though the best I think is probably a fake concept, because I'm the one.
Right.
There's just the one. Sorry, world. Right. But any of the things I am that other people also are, there's a constant pool and a constantly changing pool of participants in that identity as well. And it may be true that I achieve eliteness at one or more of them at certain points. And I think there's a fair consideration of how long elite lasts whether there are some pursuits for which it essentially persists and others that are more fleeting than others, that might be interesting. But that's where I think we confuse the pursuits. We try to identify who is the best basketball team in a given year when that's not really the question. Whereas, like, perhaps other pursuits, it is more interesting to know who was better for 1 year than others. That I think is actually that's the meaty difference, and where the competition idea gets in the way. Because what does it matter who's better between the Bulls and the Pistons in a given year? Perhaps because a year is of limited impact. Like, yeah, they're different teams from 1 year to the next. The roster turns over some, but not a lot. And isn't it much more interesting for us to have the reason to talk about Michael Jordan because he was so good for so long?
Yeah, for such a long time.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so, and yet there's no trophy for being Michael Jordan. There's just all the trophies that equal Michael Jordan. Right?
But he just trips over him.
Yeah, gets mad at him, kicks him out of the way. Yeah. Damn thing! Why didn't we just put the hinges on the other side? I don't know. But yeah, I think actually we just stumbled to the point. Like, competition is distracting from the authenticity of the value present. It so often drives us to measure who won that match, who got the trophy this year, whose flowers were the most colorful this year.
It enforces a classification system, if you will, on top of it.
Yeah.
And if we go back to letters now, in music, for instance, right?
Okay.
And somebody plays. I think music is a great example because I think it's like writing. Like, some people could write poetry, or they can write fiction. They can do lots of things with written word. And I think that it's the same kind of expression that people can do with music. And so our notions individually of music are quite different. And so somebody might say, "Oh, I'm really looking for a love song, and I want to feel what that person says." And the other person says, "Oh, no, I'm really looking for a structured performance of these notes to be like following all of these musicality rules," or whatever it is, right? And so we have this opinion that this kind of system that we place upon it that's different for everybody, and it's the imposition of our sort of our inner model of how things work that kind of ruins it, because then we can't enjoy John Coltrane for being John Coltrane. We have to sort of say, "But this isn't music,"
and I don't know if it ruins it. By all means, life is brutal and short, and people should follow their muses and do the things they want to do and absorb and immerse themselves in the things they like. Right? Mm-hmm. There's no need to listen to John Coltrane if he just has never done it for you.
Right.
There is a difference, perhaps it's even an objective one, between assessment, identifying the Coltrane of Coltrane, those top tier people, and preference. I don't mean to argue against preference, and perhaps what I dislike about kind of the arena of competition is that it conflates the two. It pretends that there's something that is objective assessment, necessarily so or true, in what are ultimately preferences.
Yeah, it tries to make real the subjective.
Yeah, I mean, the Seinfeldian rooting for laundry, back on the sports thing, right? I know which laundry I prefer. And just because my laundry is the winningest laundry in the history of the greatest sport ever on the planet, and of course I'm talking about the Yankees, it means nothing, of course, right? It's just my preference. And yeah, they've won more World Series than half of all other teams put together or whatever, and that means nothing in identifying their actual value, except for perhaps as a franchise with a dollar amount. And we can use that as a segue to talk about the other realm of competition that we talked about before all of this. But it doesn't mean anything to the levels of assessment.
We have about 15 minutes.
Oh, good. That's good to know, because I think I can make it that much further. It doesn't tell you anything about the actual value of the actual teams it's supposedly talking about, right? All the same qualifiers.
Well, it's elusive. I don't know if you could assign that.
Sorry, which one do you mean?
I don't know if you know.
What was your reference for that?
I don't know if you can assign a value at it. The same way, like I don't know if you can assign like a prettiness of color or something like you know. There's I think that you sort of impose that as if that's.
But that's just what I mean to accuse the culture of competition of doing. Giving folks this false sense that somehow competition is a crucible within which preference is tested against some sort of objective reality, and that is bullshit. And the obviously bullshit nature of that should be true to anyone who has participated in any pursuit that has ever been assessed rightly or wrongly, sensibly or insensibly via competition ever at all.
Or who has been on the other side of trying to determine that. Because I've been on the other side where I say, well, you know, these are all good, and I have to pick one. This is awful, right?
And fake, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess there's a certain fun to it in rooting for your laundry.
But you know, it's almost equally challenging because of the rules that you're putting on top of it.
Yeah. And I think the plasticine elements really do diminish the other aspects. And I imagine giving no trophy at the end of the World Series. First blush, man, baseball immediately got less interesting. Except baseball existed for decades before there was a World Series. Right? And yeah, they still kept score. Okay, fine. I do mean to say, though, I think different is possible, and different is available, and it wouldn't necessarily be less enjoyable. I know I was less excited about watching baseball this year when the pandemic-shortened season, once I heard they were actually going to do a World Series and declare a winner and all that. One of the only reasons I stay interested in who wins in a given year in baseball is because of that, 100-year legacy nearly now of World Series victories. Wait, nearly or just over? I'm not remembering which year the first World Series was. More than 100. Yeah. I think it's a question of when it started being called the World Series. Anyway, we're close. I don't remember. My memory is shit for that kind of thing. But point being, it's interesting or fun to kind of like, identify, okay, who just joined this year's portion of that train. And this year is not a realistically applicable membership in that suite because it's 1/3 the number of games per the current model, and somewhere just more than or just less than 1/2 in the historical numbers in a season. It's not the same thing.
Here's something we haven't broached at all. Is that there's two forms. Beforehand we were talking about economic competition, which I don't know if we'll have time for.
Yeah.
But I just realized that competition is how we determine our political leaders.
Oh, sure. Well. It's how we determine, right? Almost everything.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
We've allowed it to be the windsock of our realities, of our fates, at so many levels. Of course, the economic. I don't know that I want to talk about politics.
Well, no, but I could imagine that if you had changed how that system worked, in so that you would able to sort of respect the quality of it better, as opposed to this, where it's saying you win and you lose, but you had some kind of more nuance to it, right? That perhaps you would be able to get people happier with. So for instance, let's say if one party got 55% of the vote and the other got 45%, and somehow the other the minority is able to make a 45% share of the decision somehow, and there's many models for that. Maybe some people would be less frustrated with it, to say, oh no, you're locked out entirely.
I mean, there are certainly governments that essentially do that, right? Yeah. Multi-party realities where the outcome matters, and actually certain states are doing it now, right?
Yes.
Ours does it for governor now, I think.
I don't know.
Yeah, jungle primaries and whatnot.
That's a instant runoff voting.
What?
You're talking about instant runoff voting?
No. Oh. I don't think I am. Maybe that's a term for it, but.
Will you select 1, 2, 3, 4?
That's one version of it, but we also now primaries move you forward only if you are in the top two, essentially, irrespective of party. Like it's
the top two system, right?
Yeah.
Yes, right.
Which is another version of,
It's a very interesting model
of considering plurality rather than majority, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
The question of popularity in politics really loaded one for me because it's perhaps our greatest poison.
Sure, but
right?
For this conversation, we have to use that as an axiomatic assumption that we're going to service the popularity of a politician, and we have to. We're talking about the competition aspect of it, or whether that's a good way of sort of structuring how we're going to be determining who's going to lead. And I think that it has some of the same problems as competition that we saw in the other parts.
I agree with that completely. What you see me itchy about in considering the competition of contemporary politics is that I think it is mostly inertia at present, in our current moment, both in the processes and in people's participation in it. And beliefs in it and feelings about it. I don't mean to say that nobody's engaging politics based on their deeply held beliefs, but I believe those beliefs are much more the results of inertia than I'm wholly comfortable talking about, because I don't mean to offend people, and talking about people's beliefs is one of the quickest ways to do that.
Well, I think we can do better than leaving the minority vote dissatisfied with the result.
I agree heartily. I think we could do better. I think there are many versions of better than what we are currently doing.
Right, yeah.
I don't pretend to know what those are.
Exactly, yeah.
Because they'd all have to be field tested in our reality.
Of course,
of course. And even the best ideas could just fail to work for any number of happenstance reasons, for the same reason that we've been talking about in competition all along, right? You could recreate the Electoral College the most genius way ever. So that it's, I don't know, call it, depends on what your values are, but call it representative, quick, right, easy. Right. It could be all the great things, and everybody goes home rich after participating in it.
Right.
And if you launch it in the wrong month, when random other stuff is happening, people will hate it.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of it is because when it was initially developed in the 1700s, certain things were just logistically infeasible to do because travel took a long time. We didn't have counting tabulation systems. A lot of other, we didn't have calculators. There's all these things that we have nowadays, and that maybe enable different systems to be much easier than they would have been in the 1700s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think maybe though we chalk up too much to logistics. The fact is, the United States was fairly sufficiently connected in that period in which it was becoming the United States, right? Of course, not like now, of course, but basically, if they wanted the states, and rather when they wanted the states to confer on a given item, it was possible, and within amounts of time that were survivable. The Electoral College comes into existence to way dumbed down stuff that I am only an armchair expert, if any kind, on, and I'm probably not that by most folks' standards, but have dealt with it in playing with colonial history a lot. To my eyes, it comes into existence for all the same reasons almost anything else involved in politics does, which is to say a balance.
Focus on the competition part.
I'm getting there. Which is to say, it comes to existence out of an attempt to balance public sentiment and requirement with essentially, the old, once again, inertial wills to power.
We have about 4 minutes left, by the way.
So let's solve all the world's problems in that time.
Yes, sir.
But basically, it was at one level, it was an advertisement. Hey, folks, through this tiered system of you electing representatives who elect other people who ultimately participate in an election for electors, that was an attempt to sell the idea that a lot of folks, certainly not most of them, but the segment of folks that they chose to appeal to, landowning white males, it was an attempt to sell to those people the idea that they get to participate, while also still making the barrier to the unseating of those who were already at the table as high as would be palatable to the folks who might speak up enough. At one level, it was just, again, the inertia of power. And in that sense, the spoils of competition. The competitions that had gotten those people to that table.
You can't have competition without institutions existing.
I don't know that the more important truth might be the inverse of what you just said.
You can't have institutions without competition. Maybe, yeah.
And I mean that in a causal chain that is a complete loop. Most of our institutions, I think, are born of concerns about competition, and those institutions that are born from the greatest altruism and collectivism and whatever you might imagine end up fostering competition between at least their members, and we see it over and over and over again. And I think that that's demonstrative at perhaps the most crucible possible level that competition is an inherent part of our existence.
Yeah, it is. I mean, so like we have a few minutes left, but
yeah.
But basically there was that part that we were going over how we noted that the laws governing competition go back to the Roman times, and almost every culture has, when we're talking about free market competition, the laws that define what that is have changed throughout the years, and I would think that an honest economists would say that we've never quite gotten it right, and so it is it's evasive, and it is a poor part. It's interesting.
I don't know that it is right, and I'm confident that it's older than Romans, because you look at the things that have come down as 10 Commandments. You look at Hammurabi's Code, and while they're not expressly identifying, monopoly and tariff concerns, they're absolutely born from in an effort to address the problems that arise by the fact of people competing.
You mean when he said, "I am a jealous God, you should have no other God before me"? That was a competition.
He's competing for your attention with other gods, right?
You should not covet your neighbor's possessions. Yeah.
And I think there's an easy argument to be made that way back in our reptile brains and way back in our reptile history, and also still today, yes, we live in a relatively closed system of limited resources, and at one level everything's competition. The best Jan in the history of Jans was still breathing oxygen that something else might have breathed. Okay. Doesn't mean that we ever need to organize around competition. Right? Competition might be inherent. It might be inescapable.
Closing thoughts in about 30 seconds.
Cool. I think I'm there. It may be unavoidable. That doesn't mean it's necessarily interesting. It may be provocative. It may speak to that lobe, but it doesn't mean that we need to actually then organize around that. We could choose to organize around other things.
Of course.
We could choose to operate
in the emotion that we want. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Including the enjoyment of mutual participation in a thing in which, some folks are truly elite, and we could find the right terms to identify them as such without pretending for any moment that they're the best at any given moment, even if they were. Because who cares?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
Moments that are illusory.
I'm sorry we didn't get to the cheese. I think that's our time. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Let's see, end. Should we want to end? Yes.